Salve, meu povo! Aqui é o Igão. Ó, ouvindo um podcast no caminho do trabalho ou enquanto prepara a comida? Acertei? Mas uma coisa que eu sei é que cê tá aí no corre. Hoje em dia, todo mundo é correria. Parece até que o dia tem mais de 24 horas. É por isso que Rexona te dá muito mais proteção para você encarar a sua rotina. Rexona, proteção superior a 72 horas por dia. Rexona não te abandona.
Today's episode is brought to you by SalesCred Pro, the strategic resource for B2B sales that fortifies your credibility and accelerates the trust building needed for building successful business relationships. Get your free 7-day trial now at salescred.com/pro. Welcome to the Manage Smarter podcast with hosts C. Lee Smith and Audrey Strong. We're glad you're here for discussions on new ways to manage smarter, hire, develop, and retain talent, improve results, and propel team performance to new heights. This is the Manage Smarter podcast.
We're going to talk about negotiating today. And, you may think that you're good at it, but you probably aren't, because the guy we have as a guest today, fantastic. This is his jam. And we're going to get pretty granular, right, Lee?
I remember an old TV commercial. I don't remember who it was for. I don't remember where I saw it. But basically, the gist of it was, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And so this is why this is such an important topic to me, because we all have to negotiate stuff. I mean, from the very first time we get our very first job, and it never ends. It never ends. And the other thing I'm delighted about too, Audrey, is that I think this is the first time this has ever happened. You're an Ohio University graduate. I'm an Ohio University graduate. And our guest is an Ohio University graduate. So OU, oh yeah.
There we go.
I mean, a lot is at stake here. OU's reputation is really kind of standing on this
needs to be
podcast.
so.
Oh, yes. The Scripps School of Communications is quaking in their boots
yes.
right now.
It'll be superb, I promise. Welcome to Manage Smarter, everyone. My name is Audrey Strong. I'm the Senior Vice President of Communications from Ohio University here at Sales Fuel.
And I'm C. Lee Smith. I'm the founder and CEO of Sales Fuel.
Okay. Andres Lares, Managing Partner at Shapiro Negotiations Institute, co-author of a book called Persuade, the 4-step process to influence people and decisions. Andres' expertise ranges from coaching live negotiations for sports clients, including, get this, the Cleveland Browns, Brooklyn Nets, and more, to developing online content for facilitating real estate, advisory, media, banking, and pharmaceutical programs. He is a guest lecturer on negotiation and influencing at various universities, including OU, which we've mentioned, and annually teaches a sports negotiation course at Johns Hopkins University. And are you in Baltimore currently live?
I am in Baltimore, yep. Actually, I'm a couple minutes away from the campus, so it's very convenient.
Very convenient. Well, welcome.
And did I see that you have the Cleveland Browns as a client?
Well, they're a past client, but yeah, we have worked with the Browns.
Okay.
And, actually, and the Guardians too, so lots of Ohio love there. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, where do you want to start? This is a big playing field. I mean, I could start with the very simpleton, lay version of this, which is, I was always taught, never give out the first number in a salary negotiation. Force the employer to give you a number or a range first.
Well, I mean, I think already we could probably end the podcast now, because that's pretty good advice, and it's super practical. So I think wrap this up. OU, we did a good job here. But no, that's I think yes, I think that's generally good advice. And two parts of that, just as we start off very practically with the salary component, and we can kind of expand to other, kind of sales relevant positions too. But in the salary component, number one, you typically don't want to make the first offer just because of the sensitivity of that. And it's easy to put it on the other side, because that's the second question is, well, if I'm not going to go first, well, how do I do that, right? Because when they ask you, like, well, Audrey, what are you expecting for this job? And so there's when you want to lean on the fact that the person hiring you, right, they should have more of the expertise and expectations. They're the ones hiring. So there's comps for other people in that same role. There's comps other people in the company. And so while you've done your research, you can kind of put it back on them. It's actually, I'd love to hear from you all. Well, what did you have in mind, or what other people in this position get paid? And so generally you find if you volley it back once, they're not going to keep, saying, well, no, you tell me first. So that would be the advice there. And then later on, we can talk about outside of the salary piece, it depends. And so when to go first and when not, it depends. A little bit more complex than that.
That's really good too to think about too, because like when you're negotiating the price of your house and you're trying to sell your house, you look at comps in the neighborhood. That kind of dictates what the price is, and obviously you're doing professional sports, so the athletes look at similar athletes, who have similar stats, play a similar role in the team and everything like that, and what they get paid. So, yeah, I think that's really fantastic advice.
I mean, it's very practical to do, right? And so if we would do it buying a house, we should do it for our salary and everything else. And like you said, the sports world is easy, right? These are public contracts. You can see generally what people sign for. It makes it very easy. And so that is an absolute first for preparation. We should all be doing it before every negotiation.
What I also notice from sports is that if you can't get what you want, uh, in dollars or whatever, go for term. Is that something that you see in sports, and is that advice that, or is that a strategy that you can see working in the business world?
I would say I love that concept, but I'd broaden it a little bit more to the best part of that piece is that you don't want to focus on just one thing, right? And so again, whether it's salary, you're selling something. Let's move now to if you're selling enterprise software or product of some kind, right? So it's unlikely that your contract's going to have one term in it, the price, and that's it, right? So it's going to have the price, going to have the term, but it's going to have liability and warranty and all of these other pieces and how much you service that product, and there's going to be a million other and insurance and so what happens is you don't want to be negotiating one thing, which is really counterintuitive. Like most people are thinking, well, I don't really want to ask Audrey to leave like for 5 things. But it's the opposite. If you are working through 5, 6, 7 negotiables, you start to do the best way to optimize, which is trading things that are most important to you for less important to them and vice versa. So you start to realize that, for a salary for a second, I care about title and my regular compensation. I'm more flexible on the bonus and I'm more flexible on the, the PTO, for example, or vice versa, or the health insurance, the 401k matching, or, all of these things. And so you want to bundle those things. Then you start to trade. If you're negotiating over one thing, that's a fixed sum. It's literally every dollar out of my pocket is into yours and vice versa.
So this 4-step process that's part of your book, let's go to 10,000 feet on negotiating. So negotiating with Lee on an internal thing, or negotiating for a job, just negotiating in general, or I'm a salesperson. What are your 4 steps that apply to any and all negotiations?
So the 4-step process in that book is really about 4 pieces. Number 1 is credibility. And the way I would describe this very simply is, think of any commercial you see for a toothpaste, for example. You'll notice they either are a dentist or look like a dentist. And I think it's the best example because visually we're saying, oh, I believe this person because they are look like a dentist, even though we've never met them. So you transfer credibility in areas of knowledge. And actually that transfers to areas where they have no particular skills even. So you think of an athlete that could be doing a commercial for something totally unrelated. Obviously Gatorade makes sense, but an athlete that's doing a commercial for pillows, and it could be like, oh, this is my favorite pillow. They may not be a sleep expert, but because they have credibility in one field, it actually transfers. So it really is, you want to build credibility so the other side cares, number 1. Number 2 is you want to engage emotion. And the big takeaway here is people make decisions emotionally and then they justify them rationally. And so often we want to persuade other people. We're saying, oh, these are the 15 ways that, you can do this, or these are the 3 reasons you should pick me, right, against their competitors or whatever you're saying. And you've got to take a step back and realize, what's the emotional lever I want to pull? Then comes logic is the 3rd one. And logic is the one we're naturally most inclined to do, right? That's the evidence, the data. And so really it's there, but you understand its time and place. And the one caveat I would say is if you can do it in a story that's compelling, it's a heck of a lot better than 15 slides with 30 data points.
I mean, you essentially just, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So the last thing I would say is those first 3 I covered are based on Aristotle, actually. So in 350 BC, I'll pull a page out of our own book and say, who do you borrow credibility from? I think Aristotle was a pretty smart and well-respected person, so we're going to borrow it from him. But what happened is we added one other piece. So he was brilliant, but he wasn't really a good sales guy, and not all that practical either, I don't think, from his writing. So we added facilitate action. And that is creating the environment that makes it as likely as possible that the action you want takes place. So how do you do that? Otherwise, you get into, Audrey, what do you think? That's great. And then 2 weeks later, when I check in, Audrey, did you do what we talked about? No, I got competing priorities. So you want to kind of make sure it gets done. So sorry, Lee, what were you going to ask?
Oh, I was going to say exactly what you just said. So
closing. Yeah. So how do you do that? How do you get the close?
How do you get the close? Well, we could talk a whole session on that, but a couple of things we talk about. For example, one easy one to put into place is providing typically around 3 options. So why do we do that? When we provide options, you're essentially putting a box that works for you, but you're giving the other person really a sense of choice, and you want that independence and sense of choice. But you don't want so many options that it's essentially overwhelming. And there's lots of really interesting studies that there's so many options, you do nothing, right? Paralysis by analysis. But you don't want to give too few options of one or two because it feels like an ultimatum. I'm telling you what to do. So one easy one makes it more likely to create that environment is give approximately 3 options that the person can pick from. And usually it's more likely they'll move forward.
Go ahead.
The CEO of your company, Ronald Shapiro. I see there's a book on the website called The Power of Nice and how that relates to negotiation. And I'm really curious about these 3 phases of negotiation, but I'm really kind of curious about how the power of nice plays into all of this.
Well, that's a great question. So behind me, actually, that's it right there, Power of Nice. And the one we talked about earlier is Persuade.
Yep.
So they're right behind me. So Ron founded the company 29 years ago, is still involved. So I took over about 7 years ago now, but he's still involved. So he actually, the 10-second story in that, which is, for any sports fan is unbelievable, is that he was actually a sports agent. He was many things, civil rights attorney and lots, accomplished in many ways. But he was a sports agent that represented baseball players. And when I think of sports agent, and I've actually worked as a sports agent also before this, usually people's response is not touchy-feely good things, right? It's
help me, help you.
Exactly. Outside of Jerry Maguire and some great acting, typically that's not the perception. And so he made a name for himself where he was doing deals that maximized the player. So his biggest deal ever with Cal Ripken, with Eddie Murray, Kirby Puckett, all these big-time athletes. But the first people that hired him when he started S&I, Shapiro Negotiations Institute, were the owners of the teams he had negotiated with.
Wow.
And that's what made it so unique. And so then he wrote The Power of Nice, that it's like, you don't have to be a fill in the blank, bad word to get what you want. As a matter of fact, you can still be aggressive. You can still be confident. You can still make very high requests and push, but you do it the right way. And so then it's a lasting relationship that you can do multiple deals rather than one time burn that bridge.
That was a huge compliment that those teams hired him. And so what is the line? What is your definition of aggressive versus nice?
Well, so, a couple of simple things that we always talk about is, number one, the way you do it is equally as important. So, for example, we teach a lot of spending time on asking questions and deep discovery, right? Because if you think about it, deep discovery does 2 things. If I ask a lot of questions of Audrey, number one, I'm going to find out what you care about so I can help to give it to you. So that means empathy. So that part of the Power of Nice is talking about empathy. I need to find out what you care about to give it to you. And Audrey's going to want to share that because we're invested in doing this together. And the second is a great way to develop relationships. How many people do you talk to that ask you lots of questions that are genuinely curious? Then you finish the conversation and you don't feel that was a pleasure to talk to them, right? And so what you're doing is you're doing both of those things. So that's an example of Power of Nice. You're not giving anything away. You're asking for information. You're listening based on genuine curiosity. And that drives home discovery and empathy. And that's really important. Lee, I want to go back to one thing you said, just so we don't leave that hanging. The book is called The Power of Nice. It's based on 3 Ps. And that's really oversimplifying, but negotiation has 3 key phases. Preparation, which is the only aspect of a negotiation in which you have control. Probing, which is what I just talked about, asking great questions. You're not asking questions to catch someone, right? It's not like the silver bullet, like, where were you on the night of the 14th, Lee, trying to catch them? And then finally propose. And that's what everyone thinks of negotiating. But how do you do that in a way that maximizes your share while still satisfying the other side?
What goes into a good proposal versus a bad proposal?
Well, you shouldn't be making one unless you have information. So that deep discovery should come before. That's one big one that unfortunately not everyone does, right? We're good problem solvers. We race the solutions, but we probably should do a little bit more discovery before we propose is one of them. And another one that ties into all of this is aim high within reason when you're making your proposals. And so then the question is, what's reason? And that's where it goes back to the comparables, what we call precedents. Use the best precedents you can use, right? The best house around the corner, the best player that's similar to your athlete, that kind of thing.
This goes to one of my pet peeves is like when people say it never hurts to ask. And I say it absolutely hurts to ask. If you're asking for something completely unreasonable or unfair or one-sided or something like that, it completely either hurts your credibility or your motive or anything, or your ability then to work together with this person and show them that you are looking out for their best interest if you're asking for something that's completely outlandish.
Absolutely. And so you want to find the best precedent you can. And the way we ask people is, how are you going to justify that? Now, doesn't mean you should be justifying the other side. You can propose, and actually justifying often makes it a little bit softer. So you don't want to do that. But if they respond and say, Lee, are you crazy? What do you base that on? You better have a good response. And if you don't, that's probably not the first offer you should be making.
I have a question. Coming out of my years at OU, going into television news for 15 years, which is a very high supply, low demand employee pool, where they'd say, cut it out, Audrey. We have 100 resume tapes in our office, and we'll just pick one of them, and you can leave or whatever. Well, if you're in a high supply, low demand career, or you have a weak place at the table within your organization, or you're a young Gen Zer that wants a promotion or wants a promotion, and you've worked there 6 months, a weak position at the start for negotiating, how do you overcome that, whatever the deal is to be done?
Yeah, and there's a couple of things. I mean, the things you can control is out prepare, right? So if I'm doing that, I'd be thinking about what does Lee care about, what does Audrey care about, how do I position myself and put more time and effort than others. I think number one, number two, realistic about the leverage, right? So I think in that space it's very similar to in sports, right? So to break into sports is very difficult, and then as you get going in sports, you get to a point where it's the opposite. At the very top, everyone knows everyone. So I think you want to be, you want to kind of get your foot in the door, not have an ego, out prepare others. I think is where you start. Now, I'm not a big fan of, for example, unpaid internships or things like that, and I think the reality is, I think you should be compensated for doing work, but being willing to, like I say this to people, I reach out, how do I get into sports? And I say, take one of those internships that you weren't sure about, but take it as serious as you would a full-time job and then some. And what's going to happen is there'll be 20 people at that training camp internship in the NFL, for example, but you're the only one who's doing everything plus some. And then when it's done, who do you think they're going to remember? The 19 people that just kind of did, what was asked and nothing else? Or that one person who was the first one in, last one out, clearly prepared, thought through, brought some ideas, was humble. It's easy choice. And then after that, you'll find the second, third, fourth are easy. And generally at that point, you're not even applying for jobs. I think people are calling you, I would say, in those kind of smaller, more competitive markets.
One of your bullet points of topic is how to follow up negotiating without being annoying. This could be for any negotiation. So I like the without being annoying part is what intrigues me, because I'm probably guilty of that myself. So the being annoying part. Yeah.
Yeah. Me too.
I'm not going to say anything.
We're in it together. We're in it together. The only way you can give advice, I think, if you've made some mistakes yourself. So you put me down in that category. I think, so one of the things we talk about is think about it as delivering value. That's kind of the best way to think about it is, if I'm going to send this to Audrey to stay on top, am I delivering value? So it also means that empathy, I'm thinking about you. I'm not checking in on Audrey, have you made a decision yet? Because I want my commission. I'm checking on Audrey because I wonder if there's questions that I can answer, if there's a way I can help you build a better case internally. If your colleagues have questions, that if there's ways I can make you look good, right? It's about you, not about me. So I think that's probably, there's some other micro kind of tips, but I think the big one is think about them, not you.
Talk about the power of patience in negotiating. Because it seems to me that if you're just trying to get a deal done, you're rushing and everything like that. It seems to me like you're more likely to leave stuff on the table, make mistakes or whatever. And, just being willing and able just to hang in there and be as patient as possible, I think that has to help your leveraging situation.
I love the question. And I've been doing this for 15 years. And I think I often will ask, so we talk about having a devil's advocate. So if you're in a big negotiation, having someone that you can run things by, that can beat up everything you do and say before you kind of get to the real negotiation table. And I use in a couple, and I can tell you that one of the biggest things that when we're advising on deals is we'll remind people that this is not going to get done in that first offer. It's going to take multiple iterations. I can't tell you how many times Lee will come to me with a deal. I'm like, we're one deal away. This is my next offer. And the first thing I say is, Lee, you're not one offer away. And it's not going to end this week. It's probably going to be 6 weeks, and there's probably going to be 7 offers. And then even just that alone makes you think about your next offer and gives you more patience, and you slow down. I can't tell you how many times the devil's advocates, even doing this for 15 years, studying it, living and breathing it, it's the most common way you can provide value, I think, to a peer or to yourself, is like taking a step back, taking a breath, and realizing that patience is so important. It's rarely going to happen at the pace that you want. And realizing that early makes a huge difference, right? Because if you're the one that's got urgency and starts getting desperate, that's leverage being thrown out the window.
What about the power of walking away?
Well, if you're not willing to walk away, then you're probably getting extorted, right? So I think you got to be really careful there. So I think that walking away, I would say that one of the most powerful ways to gain leverage is to have alternatives, and walk away is one of them. So it is about increasing the number of alternatives for you and the value of those alternatives. And if you can, and you're slightly, you're being aggressive, you can minimize the alternatives of the other party. But alternatives are everything, and walking away is one of them. So you got to be willing to walk away, and you got to have alternatives.
How about this? I really like your proposal, but it's just not in the budget.
They're not in the budget. Well, it's very rare for salespeople to hear that, I think, right, Lee?
No one hears that.
What? So there's a lot of things you could do. But my favorite is, of course, and you'll hear this in everything that we're talking about, is asking a good question. So, for example, one of the ones that I like to is, Lee, I understand it's not in the budget. And so the two questions I would start with, number one, if it was in the budget, if you had enough money to do this, is this something that you would recommend internally? So I want to find out, is not in the budget an excuse? Do you actually believe in it? Those things, right? So number one, I want to find out, is Lee a supporter or not? And then number two is, have you ever been in a situation where it wasn't in the budget and found another budget or another way to get something done? So those would be two questions I'd have up my sleeve if you get the common, it's not in the budget.
Well, your website is shapironegotiations.com. His LinkedIn, I'm going to spell your name, Andres, so everybody knows how to. Andres, and the last name Lares, Lares. Lee, do you have a final question?
Yeah, I would say the other one would be this, is like, we're happy with who we already have. I'm happy with who we got playing third base right now. I'm happy with who's supplying these widgets to us right now. Go away.
Yeah, so I think this one will be kind of a little bit more technical in nature. The response to that would be, let's go back to what we talked about earlier, which is emotion. You're not going with logic. It's not we've been around for 29 years or we have 7 other features they don't have. Number one is you want to think about an emotion. And specifically, I would think about an emotion that can cause a little bit of fear or doubt, right? Lee, what are you missing out by not looking at this? What are you missing out by your competitors looking at this and you're not, or by not taking advantage of this potential benefit you would have? Or so that I would be thinking about that. And then I would frame it in some questions that you're not looking for them to say, oh, you got me. Woo! Not only am I going to give you time, I'm going to buy before you even go into more details. I would ask a question that gets them thinking. That's what you're doing. You're just planting the seed.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to negotiate the close of this podcast. Andres, this has been a pleasure. Really great stuff. And obviously, if you need somebody to do a deal with you or advise you, he is your man. It's ShapiroNegotiations.com. They can reach you there. Just go through the website and form fill. Is that how you
go
like
to the
to?
website?
Okay.
We're on LinkedIn, and we got lots of blogs. So yeah, find us in any of those places.
And just wait for the Alumni Association to call us now.
No.
But they're not going to ask for money. Don't worry about that.
No, they never do that.
Well, we'll let you handle that. Okay. Thanks, Andres. Pleasure.
Thank you both.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information at salesfuel.com.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.